Here in the United States, the deadly bombings at the Boston Marathon still top the news, and we're joined now by our national correspondent Jim Malone and reporter Henry Ridgewell in London. Let's start with you, Henry. If you can, take us back to '05 when the London bombings happened, and if you can do a comparative analysis with regards to what happened in Boston, and how do you think the government is reassessing the security measures?
Well, the bombings here in London in July 2005 were clearly a huge shock to the city authorities and to the people of the city themselves. And we've seen a similar response in Boston with the bombings there. Shock initially, and then a level of resolve among the people that they're not going to let the terrorists or whoever carried out these attacks win the day, and they're going to get back to normal life as soon as possible. In terms of the response from the authorities and the security services, there were certain systemic failures that were reassessed following the attacks. They discovered, for example, that their shortwave radios did not work in the tunnels of the metro system here, and that held up the rescue effort. So there were certain things that were reassessed in terms of that, but there was also a re-evaluation really of the city's attitude towards attacks like these, and a recognition perhaps that you can't lock down every single aspect of a city, every single transit system, every single street. A city by its own nature is vulnerable, and a key part of keeping the security is the attitude of the public and the people around. So there is a raising of the level of awareness of the people in terms of looking out for suspect bags, suspect packages in vulnerable areas, in popular tourist areas, in transit systems and so on. And really the level of resolve in London came back very strongly, and people were determined to get back to normal. And I think from what I've seen, we're beginning to see that in Boston as well. A lot of people saying how tragic these events are, but also that the only way to respond to this really is to get back to life as normal.
Jim, turning to Boston now, which is your hometown, the attacks coincided with the state holiday, the Patriots' Day. How do you think the Bostonians are taking this?
Well, obviously it was a body blow to the city, its image. Bostonians are a resilient group. They're going to bounce back. Sometimes they're a little hard to get to know, but once you get in their midst, they become very loyal friends. And I think we saw in the immediate aftermath how people rushed to help those who were injured. You know, as a kid, we would go to the marathon every year. It was a big local holiday in Massachusetts. It drew runners from around the world and has for decades. The most elite marathon runners in the world like to participate in Boston. So it was a real day of the world coming into the Boston community. And although that's been rocked a bit by the events we've seen, I think Boston will bounce back. It's also an indication that since 9/11, Americans may have become lulled into a false sense of security. The threats are still there, and I think this will be a reminder to that.
Henry, tell me something. Now in the digital age, when we have tons of video and images from cell phone and security cameras, what kind of role do you think they play in terms of getting to the core of these investigations?
In Britain, they play a hugely important role. It's one of the most surveillance societies in the world. There's something like 2 million to 4 million surveillance cameras across the country in a population of 60 million people. And there was a study done recently that suggested on an average day somebody would be filmed by a surveillance camera 300 times, and that was before the advent of camera phones and that sort of thing. In terms of the investigation into the July 2005 bombings, they played a key part because the surveillance cameras at railway stations that the bombers used to travel down to London picked up their faces very clearly. And so very quickly following the bombings, the police were able to issue photos of the people who had traveled down, the suspects, and very quickly able to investigate and check that there were no further threats and determine where this attack had come from. So it does play a very important role here in Britain, and people are really used to the surveillance society here now. There are portions of society who object to it, but I think the majority probably approve of it and see it as a way of keeping them safe.
Thank you to both of you for taking the time out. Thank you so much.